Brooks Kubena joining us here on Halftime. He covers LSU football for the Advocate newspaper out of Baton Rouge, former Democrat Gazette newspaper, so he understands Arkansas and Arkansans fairly well, too. Brooks, appreciate your time today. How's it going today in Red Stick?
Well, it's a busy day, which is not unnormal for this entire year.
It's a good way of putting it. And busy, it would be busy no matter what because it's football season and it's November and it's LSU. But, you know, I'm sure right now the Tigers would much rather talk about the struggles that they've had this year and not being able to defend a national championship or an SEC championship. I think they'd rather talk about freshman quarterbacks and injuries or I think they'd rather talk about COVID infections than what's happening right now involving the football team and allegations of sweeping sexual assault under the rug. It feels like things just keep getting worse over there at LSU.
Yeah, today, news stories, it's not just the LSU football team as well. Today story came out today with the LSU tennis player, Jade Lewis. She came forward publicly for the first time and is speaking out about how LSU repeatedly handled reports of her being abused by a former football player, Drake Davis. Yesterday, the tennis coaches, Julia Sell, said that they didn't know about it until there were, the summer of 2018, and the tennis player saying that, she knew the full truth and simply chose to stand by. So, this is being played out now to where the victims are starting to come forward and saying their stories and how they weren't taken seriously. Yesterday we had a story. We spoke with the executive deputy athletics director at LSU, Rouge Osbury. There was a police report with Drake Davis, former LSU football player, who there was a police report that had a text message from Drake to Osbury that said that he had punched his girlfriend. And there, in the police report, there were about a 6-minute phone call between him and Rouge. And we asked Osbury about that yesterday, and he said that whenever he saw that message, he called him immediately. And Drake Davis, he said, "So did you punch her?" And he said, No, I didn't. I didn't do that." And he said, "Well, you sent me a message that you did." And he told him to call the police because, Osbury is a mentor to a lot of these players. That's kind of his role in some ways. And there had been, throughout these police reports, you can see a relationship between Drake Davis and her that, a lot of people knew about it and that it was troubling, that a lot of people thought it should end and not continue. And Rouge had heard that she was in his house and he wouldn't leave, and he was advising Drake to call the police to tell her to leave because, in Louisiana law, you can call on the police and they can come and get you out. He was under the understanding, he said that she was not a student at the time, so he believed that wasn't a Title IX case. He thought it had to do with the police, but we spoke with experts that in Title IX and laws that even if Drake Davis is a player and a student at the time, that involves Title IX and needed to be reported. And it wasn't until 11 days later from that phone call that it began, the investigation, so the Title IX, that it was reported. So a lot of this is new. A lot of this is coming out. So, there's probably going to be more. This is the kind of case where, what else will be found? More people are coming forward with details, and LSU has already said that they're hiring a team to come in and review their Title IX policies and plans, and we'll see what that does. They say it will conclude later next spring, but in the meantime, a lot of these police reports and victims are coming forward with the stories of their own.
This sounds eerily alike the situation at Baylor from a few years ago. And details might be different in some situations here, but the similarities just sound, like they're tied together here. Football players on a routine basis isn't the right word, but a disturbing trend of sexual assaults from the football team swept under the rug. Administration, coaching staff might know about it. Man, and we saw what happened at Baylor. And I understand they're bringing in an independent firm to do the investigations, but it feels like we've seen this movie before, Brooks.
And how this turns out, we'll continue to see. Right now, we have most details on two cases, one with Drake Davis, the other with Darius Geis, former LSU football player, running back that was released from the Redskins due to a separate arrest. More police report details came out that he had taken a partially nude photo of a woman who, without her consent, shared it around. So those are two of the details that we know most so far. And others were implicated in the USA Today story that came out on Monday. And just digging into it on my own and coworkers myself, like we'll see what else there is. Right now, there's two main stories from this, but it's not just LSU athletics either. This has been there are other cases with fraternity members and others in cases that were handled at LSU. So we'll continue to have more details on this, but this seems to be the beginning of understanding the fullness of what's been happening behind the scenes for a long time.
Brooks Kubena of the Advocate and LSU here on Halftime with us. Brooks, let's get into a little bit of the football chat. Obviously, a big one coming up this Saturday. Hopefully, if everything goes out. But before I get into the actual football conversation, how is LSU's COVID numbers looking? We've talked about with what's happening with Arkansas as of now, and as far as we've heard, everything should be a go from the Arkansas end to get the game played on Saturday. What are you hearing on your end with LSU?
They're mostly back, namely at quarterback. Last week, whenever they were practicing, they only had one scholarship quarterback available because of quarantine. From the beginning, so right after the Auburn game, and it seems like this happened at a Halloween party, and viral cases happened after that. I heard that there were only about 3 to 4 actual positives among football players. But as you know, anybody that's in high-risk contact with any player has to quarantine as well. So a bulk of the LSU football team ended up in quarantine. We're talking about walk-ons having to replace people in practice, defensive linemen having to play off the line. No tight ends were available. Wide receivers were missing. People in the secondary were missing. They couldn't field a team against Alabama, and that's why that game didn't happen. And their one scholarship quarterback that was available, the true freshman, TJ Finley, he was the one who started in place of Miles Brennan against South Carolina, looked really good then, played poorly against Auburn, and he took all the first-team reps last week. The second-team quarterback last week was their punter, Zach Von Roseberg. He's a former minor league pitcher. He's got an arm, but that's not who you want as your second-team guy. Most of the players came back, from my understanding, yesterday and Monday in kind of 2 separate chunks. And, they had time to practice this week for Arkansas. So I think they're going to be able to game plan and be ready for that. Conditioning-wise, whenever people are in quarantine, they're still able to work out, condition together in their own quarantine section. So I don't think they're going to be out of breath whenever all of a sudden they have to take the field. But I think they, through the time, they were able to, get ready just from watching film and other things through that. So they seem to be as close to fully back as they can be. I don't anticipate there being any huge players out on Saturday. So, TJ Finley, again, getting the start, I think, it seems to be the case because he took all the first-team reps. I think it's highly unlikely that Max Johnson comes back from the quarantining and suddenly can compete for the starting job. So that's where the team is at right now.
Brooks, it's crazy to think about just from a football perspective how much this matchup and these two teams have changed in 365 days. And last year, obviously, LSU was just on this magical run, and it was one that just it caught the aura of everybody in the nation. And then you look at Arkansas last year, it was just a dumpster fire that kept getting lighter fluid poured on it for the past 2 years. And it's almost like, and I'm not in no way, shape, or form am I saying LSU's at that point, but the scripts have flipped a little bit. LSU has been struggling as of late. The last time we saw LSU play was just a beat down by Auburn, and Arkansas has slowly been trending upward. But now Arkansas is coming off a 30-point loss against Florida. But Brooks, this whole matchup from 1 year to this year, it's just crazy how much things have changed in from LSU being favored by over 30. I don't remember what the line was that year, to Arkansas opening up as the favorite. It's just crazy to think about how much this has changed in a year.
It's incredible to think about. And I think one of the things to highlight here is how much a transfer quarterback can influence things. I think Felipe Franks has done wonders for the Razorbacks. I mean, people at LSU can relate to that. I mean, they were not doing well until they got a graduate transfer too, and Joe Burrow, and things started to look pretty good after that. This LSU team, and this is kind of the subject of the story that'll come out tomorrow for me, is it's a perfect storm of problems. I mean, if you look at in the history of college football, there are very few teams that end up having either a losing record or even close to 4 or 5 losses. I mean, Auburn is the big case that we think of. They went 8-5 after their 2010 and then went 3-9 the year after that. LSU kind of dealt with that in 2008 after their 2007 win, and there's only a handful of others after that. And just identifying the problems, what happened at LSU, part of it is, the thing with other programs that have struggled before, there are coaching changes. That's kind of a commonality. LSU lost their passing game coordinator, who was kind of a quasi-offensive coordinator in some ways, Joe Brady, who's now in the NFL. And then Dave Aranda is now coaching Baylor. He was their defensive coordinator. So they have switched schemes, basically, on defense from 3-4 to 4-3. And I think that's where most of the problems are this season. Offense has taken a hit because you lost your starting quarterback. That's a big hit. And Miles Brennan, this true freshman who's never played in SEC games before, and suddenly he's thrown into the mix with South Carolina and then Auburn again. And on the offensive line, they've had some missing pieces as well. Dare Rosenthal was indefinitely suspended. He's their starting left tackle, and a big reason why they had some protection problems against Auburn. He's back, and he should be able to contribute at least as a second-team guy on Saturday. But just with what happened with LSU, it's been defense all year. That's been their problem, mainly. Just to start from the beginning, this is a team that had some opt-outs. Their secondary, whenever it was blown up by Mississippi State the very first week of the season, Derek Stingley, their All-American cornerback, was out because he had an illness and spent the night in a hospital. It wasn't COVID-related, but that had to force the entire team to reshuffle, and their starting nickel safety, Kerry Vincent, opted out for the NFL draft, so that's a hit. And then you had to replace him with a graduate transfer, Darren Evans, who came from Nicholls State and had only been there for a couple of weeks. And then starting at corner was a guy named Jay Ward, who spent most of the preseason out with an MCL tear. So it's not a surprise that they were torched in that way. And you have a true freshman cornerback on the other end, even though he was healthy, Eli Ricks, who wasn't as prepared as he could have been. And the secondary has continued to have problems throughout that because you have a new system and the COVID pandemic, which has hurt pretty much everybody. I look at a lot of teams. A lot of people are not playing good football, but LSU in particularly, the schemes just have the schematic problems where they're not understanding what defense they're in, whether they should be in zone or man, or understanding which checks are supposed to happen when, and understanding why as well, and being out of place and whenever the ball is snapped. That's been exacerbated over time because they just haven't been able to reset. Their starting nose tackle, he opted out as well. The defensive line depth has suffered because another defensive tackle entered the transfer portal, and his name was Apu Ika. He was supposed to be a starter, and then another opted out of the season as well, Nelson Jenkins. So they've got a lot of hits on this team, but they've had couple of weeks to prepare and get back to the basics and understand what they're supposed to do. But is it the time for them to reset? We'll see. I think linebacker's also been an issue. Just getting people aligned. You had a graduate transfer in Jabril Cox, who was, an All-American at North Dakota State, and jumped into here and wasn't even around for the spring and had to come in and try and learn this defense. And he's looked good at times, struggled in others. And Damone Clark was their number 18. That's a number of leadership, and he's struggled throughout the year. And they had to bench him against Auburn, and Micah Baskerville stepped in and played okay. But you think about some missing pieces there as well. Marcel Brooks, in the offseason, transferred to TCU. He could have played linebacker at other places. And then Dante Starks was a player who was arrested in the offseason as well, and he's off the team now. So we're talking about a bunch of different factors that go into a reason why this defense has not been able to do well. And it just seems like a perfect storm for everything to go wrong defensively for this team, and they haven't been able to fix that yet.
Brooks, we got to run. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on today. Hopefully we'll have a game on Saturday.
Yeah, we'll see.
We will. It's Brooks Kubena from the Advocate newspaper in Baton Rouge, covering LSU football. All right, we're going to wrap the show up in just a moment with halftime homework and a couple of sweepstakes to let you know about at hitthatline.com, including winners for the Hardee's Lunch Bunch. My stomach's growling. I'm sure yours is as well. So stay tuned for this little cherry on the top of the show. Halftime homework next.